Welcome to the Irish NFL show. Radio Row continued. We just keep on rolling. All Radio Row, all the time. Brought to you by Dunes and Drams. We're delighted to have with us Lindsay Rhodes from Sumner Sports. Lindsay, former guest on the show. Great to have you back.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. You guys are crushing it.
Well, thank you very much. We like to think so, but it's great to have outside perspective on these things. Undercovered aspects of the NFL as your stock in trade.
Yeah.
Give us an undercovered angle for both teams ahead of Sunday, please.
Oh gosh. I don't know that anything is undercover about this game anymore, by the way, after like day 3 on Radio Row. I feel like everything has been peeled back. The stuff that I'm the most interested in this game, there's 3 things. One, Jackson Smith-Njigba, I think is clearly, might be the offensive player of the year by the time that award is announced on Thursday night. I think he is such a special talent, and I think that that's going to be quite a challenge for the Patriots to try and find a way to limit him. And I have a colleague at Sumer Sports, Sean Syed, who did a really interesting tape breakdown that he put out
5 minutes ago.
And he broke down all the different ways that the Rams tried to stop Jackson Smith-Njigba, right? Like you press him, that didn't work. You play him off, that did not work. You put him in the box, that did not work. So I just think there's such a challenge there. And then if they actually do put 2 men on him, where is the hole? And then it's on Sam Darnold to evaluate. And I think that he is at a point in his development where I think that he will probably be able to identify where the space will be. And then the other thing is Drake May and the pressure coming from the Seahawks. This defense is so good. And I think that Drake May, if there is a weakness, and he was my all-pro first-team quarterback vote, but if there is a weakness in his game right now, I think it's his sack avoidance. And there is, I think a lot of people talk about that, like sacks is an O-line stat, and in many ways it is also a quarterback stat. And in his case, I think that there are a lot of like pressures that turn into sacks at a high rate and have so in the playoffs right now. That's a number that I've noticed in our Sumer Live dashboard, where we have live stats during all of the playoff games. And the one stat that has stood out to me also is that there have been 2 games in the playoffs so far where he has 0 pressure to escape attempts. None in the entire game, 2 times. And so I think in a perfect world, what you want your quarterback to do is feel the pressure coming and be able to, you don't always have to escape. Obviously, he can tuck the ball and run, and he does that. But in a perfect world, you want them to, at least every once in a while, keep their eyes up, evade the pressure, and also get the ball out so you can keep the passing play alive, because that's the way you're most efficiently going to pick up yards. The fact that there have been 2 games in the playoffs where when there is pressure, there are no escape attempts kind of makes me feel like in a game against a defense that is the caliber of the Seahawks, where they are blitzing at a low rate but getting pressure at a high rate, meaning that they're just getting pressure with 4. I think it's going to be a tough challenge for him. And I'm looking to see whether or not those pressures turn into sacks, or whether or not he's able to continue to keep his eyes up and throw the ball downfield.
We had a chance to talk to former Seahawks wide receiver Brian Walters a little bit earlier on. He made a really interesting point just about the Seahawks defense and the types of quarterback they've faced. Which really, apart from Trevor Lawrence, they haven't had a hugely mobile quarterback come up against them, which could cause them.
That's true. Stafford is not that.
Yeah.
So that is an interesting point. I think that the Seahawks defense is, when I think of the Seahawks defense, it's like the entire thing. I don't know where the hole is really in the defense. So I would imagine that they will be coached up for that and that they'll be able to handle that. The thing about the Seahawks in this game too, that I don't know about the Patriots, and I don't know. So people talk about the strength of schedule for the Patriots, and that could potentially be overblown, but I work in data. And so we're thinking in terms of probabilities. What do we know? What has already been proven time and time again? What have we seen people handle and handle well? The Seahawks path in the NFC, and then even just in the regular season, they have faced some tough challenges and been in some tough games, and they have found ways to win those games, right? Like the Rams game, the NFC Championship, I think that there's a possibility. I'm not saying it's true, but at the end of the year, we might look back and say that was the game, right?
So you tell me that Seahawks defense gives up 479 yards and ask me to guess what the result is. There's no way I'm saying that the Seahawks are going to Santa Clara.
Right, but the Rams offense made the Seahawks Seahawks defense look bad and the Seahawks defense made the Rams. I'm like, it's just, it all kind of like they were able to put each other in a blender. Both of the offenses are very good. And I just don't know that the Patriots have been challenged in that way in the postseason, even. Like, they've faced insanely good defenses. I mean, murderers row when it comes to defensive play. When you have to go through the Texans and then the Broncos, and now you've got the Seahawks up next, that's insane. And that's part of the reason that we've seen Drake May throwing interceptions, and his EPA numbers have been lower than they were in the regular season, where he was, you know, one of the best quarterbacks across the board in every stat category, and the scores have been low. That's because he's faced insane defenses. The reason they've been able to win in spite of that, and they might have otherwise, but like the offenses of those teams had clear and obvious deficiencies that you could identify. The Seahawks offense does not.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm trying to get at in a long-winded way is that we've seen the Seahawks overcome a bunch of challenges, and I don't know that I've seen that of the Patriots. And so I have more reason from a probability standpoint to think that the Seahawks will be able to handle whatever challenges come up. And I don't know the answers for the Patriots.
What do the data tell us about how the Patriots defense has performed in the playoffs? Because looking at them, they really seem to have stepped up in those games.
Yeah, well, it's hard to evaluate that too, though, because of the clear and obvious deficiencies on the offenses that I am talking about. Like, I mean, to a degree, I suppose you could give credit for CJ Stroud or you could give them credit for the performance we saw from CJ Stroud. That could be the defense putting him in a blender. But the problem there is that CJ Stroud had presented some of these problems in other games too. It felt like it was more related to CJ Stroud in that game. And then you obviously have the Broncos, where Jared Stidham, give him credit, I think started the game great, but then good defenses adjust to what they're seeing. And that's what we saw in that game too. And all of a sudden it kind of went downhill from there. And so I think that that's just not the same type of challenge. And so I don't know how to allocate credit or blame in the case of them.
It's also very difficult, of course, to account for the difference that great coaching is going to make in this game, right? On both sides. But it's particularly intriguing when I'm looking at the Patriots, I think, because we know what Josh McDaniels is capable of. We know what Mike Vrabel is capable of. If there's a coaching duo that I trust, and let me not overlook the DC either, but if there's a coaching triumvirate that I trust to have a plan for this situation, I trust the Patriots in that sense.
I agree. The Patriots, Vrabel's such an interesting coach too, though, because so I work again in the data community, and I hear him take the job and stand up at the press conference and say, we're going to run the ball and play good defense. And I'm like, oh my God, no, the way you win games in the NFL now is you have to have a solid passing attack. You just have to.
Yeah.
This is an efficiency metric, right? Like, you have to be able to get the ball downfield.
You run because you're winning. You don't win because you're running, right?
Or you run to set up the pass, right? And the Seahawks are actually a perfect example of that this year. They run a ton, and they have not until recently. Actually, they've gotten much better at the end of the season. But for the regular season, they're 29th in rush EPA. But they run so much that the rushing volume kind of pushes the rushing yards up. And so people think that they're a good rush offense.
Why is that? Is that about risk management? Because I thought that watching the Eagles this season, they seem to be very conservative. And the Seahawks at times, they've done it a lot better, seem to have been similar in that we're not going to put the ball at a high degree of risk if we don't need to. If you force us to, we will. But teams haven't been good enough to be able to force them to do that, bar the Rams in the championship game.
I think there is an element of that, yes. I think also there's an element of them thinking what you want to do is put the passing attack in the right situation to maximize the opportunities that they actually take. And the Seahawks this season have been a very interesting example of that too. Like I talked about them running the ball all the time. Well, they're running ball all the time. They run a lot of play action, and then they don't pass the ball very much. From a pass rate over expected, they're negative. They're, closer to the bottom of the league than the top of the league. But then when it comes to EPA per pass, they're 8th. So what that tells you is that they're trying to get, I think, with the 12 personnel, the heavy tight end looks, and then the number of times that they're running the ball, they're trying to almost bait the defense into giving you a base look. Like, we're going to do this so much that you have to take this seriously. And now give us a look that accounts for what we're actually doing most of the game. And then when I see the look I want, then I'm going to throw it, and I'm going to pick just the right moment. And so it's going to be an efficient throw. It's going to work. It's not going to fail. And so you're seeing Sam Darnold and the passing offense really maximize the chances that they actually take, which are few. And so I think that the whole thing together is a very smart plan, but it's a different conversation than like running the football is the way you win games. It is certainly a part of the equation. They all kind of, everything affects the rest of the things, and that's the fun thing about football is that there isn't just a one quick sentence that can synopsize something.
I love this because football fundamentally has to be a game of misdirection, right?
Yes.
Everybody's lined up a helmet over a helmet in theory.
Right.
So you got to make them think that you're going to do the thing that you're not going to do to be able to do the thing that you want to do. But the investment that you now have to make, to your point, before you can pull that off, it's not only over the course of a game, it's what you're showing over the course of the season, right? So we get that one moment when we need it the most, and then we go all in.
Yeah, and the motion and the ways that coaches now especially are trying to engage in the deception on defense, on offense. You've got we can track at Sumer how quarterbacks handle middle of the field open to middle of the field closed, right? And that was that type of deception and how you show one look and then you actually switch it up post snap to a different look. And there's just so much chess taking place that I think, your average fan who goes to a Super Bowl party and wants to buy a couple of squares and eat some nachos or something like that. It's awesome that you can enjoy football without that. But I think it's also awesome that you can look at it, see a totally different thing than someone who's casually watching the game. There's just so many layers to it.
What do you see when you're watching that Patriots running game? Because we know, Travion Henderson in particular is a home run hitter, but they don't always look like they've been able to get the kind of efficiency down that you would like to see if you're them.
Yeah, Ramondre, though, but in the postseason, they've been much better. And I think Ramondre has really come on strong later in the season. I wonder how much of that has to do with, to a degree, you can always, that the things are always related, right? Like, is the defense just saying you're not going to beat us through the air? And so we're going to keep everything in front of us. And that's why all of a sudden the run game starts to look a certain way, is because people have adjusted to just make sure that Drake May doesn't beat him over the top But yeah, I think that they're going to be a really interesting aspect of this game. Kenneth Walker, too, who has historically been a pretty inefficient runner, has just been like breaking ankles out there in the postseason. So, and I think that also under the radar, the Seahawks they have a couple of rookie offensive linemen playing in the interior who have they crushed the draft as far as, their last offseason in so many ways they crushed, right? Like when they sent DK, they said, okay, we're going to move on from that. And then people talked about it as if they lost DK Metcalf without taking into account the fact that they actually chose to be without DK Metcalf. And they chose to move on from Geno Smith and go in a different direction, which tells you that there was a plan, that they had something in mind that those people couldn't accomplish.
John Schneider has absolutely crushed it, to your point, in so many aspects of what he's done. The right coaching hire, the right exits, the right drafts, successive drafts. He's on a heater.
He absolutely is. And I think that actually, I know that some people will probably find this kind of a Super Bowl matchup less appealing because there's less star power. You don't have a Patrick Mahomes here or some of those big names. And I get that. This kind of Super Bowl matchup's far more fun for me and probably people like all of us here, because we have to spend a whole week. No, we don't have to. We get to. We're very grateful for the opportunity to talk about it for a week. But when you're really digging into, I remember all of the years when it was the Patriots over and over and over again. And I was like, how many times can we have the conversation about Tom Brady's legacy and Bill Belichick's legacy and how Bill Belichick has built this? And it just gets repetitive and we all kind of know and just go to the game. This is very different this week. These two teams, the fact that they're here is fascinating, that you have a 4-win team from last year in the Patriots. And then you have a Seahawks team that many people talked about as almost like gutting the offense in order to rebuild it, when in effect they were actually building it. Like they were building something very specific. They weren't rebuilding. They didn't I think people thought that the offense was going to be a hindrance for them this year, and it has very much not been. It hasn't been as strong as the defense, but the way that they've actually schemed around the pieces that they have, which to me is ultimately the true test of good coaching and being a good general manager, is actually understanding how to maximize the value of the pieces that you have. And the Seahawks are a fascinating example of that.
You look at now the haves and the have-nots in the league, and good organizations can literally turn things around in one season by making the right choices.
If you have a quarterback.
Yeah, if you have a quarterback, of course. But the pressure that puts on other organizations is fascinating to me. And I guess we particularly saw it in the coaching carousel and in the number of teams that decided to move on, because the tantalizing prospect that, we could go from zero to hero, it seems more real now than it has in a long time.
Yeah, it was a weird year for me in terms of the coaching carousel because so many teams moved on. And I felt like, just of all years to do that, this felt like a bizarre year to do that, because there weren't, like last year we had identified Ben Johnson, who's going to go into the cycle, and we think he's a star and he's such an up and coming offensive coordinator. You never know if it's going to hit or if the coordinator is going to be a good head coach, because they're two totally different skill sets. But at least you're like, that's what I want to try for really hard. So if I'm going to fire a coach, I'm going to fire it now and just take our shot at going to get that rising star. This cycle didn't feel like it had that guy. Like there really weren't any coordinators that people were like, oh my God, he's got to be ours. And so we've seen a lot of teams hire like a retread coach that feels sort of like, is it going to be that different? Like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are frustrated about getting to the dance and always winning, but not winning enough. Well, you get rid of Mike Tomlin, and I realized that was his choice there, not theirs. And then you replace him with Mike McCarthy. To me, I feel like I would have preferred them say, we're going to just take a shot on a young, smart, like, let's rebuild the whole thing, because this is the moment to do that, as opposed to putting kind of like what feels a little bit like a bridge coach on this situation. There are some coaching hires that feel a little bit uninspired.
It felt a little bit to me that you had a lot of people succumbing to narrative fallacy and deciding, like, well, there isn't a Ben Johnson, but maybe there's a Mike Vrabel. Maybe it's the Mike Tomlin, or it's the Mike McCarthy, or it's the John Harbaugh, the guy that another organization walked away from. And turns out he still has plenty more left in the tank. Well,
and there is some truth to, like, I think the one thing that the head coach has to be really, really good at, and this is when I was saying about Mike Vrabel's press conference that scared me, that I didn't take into consideration as much as I should, the game management, understanding when to call a timeout and when not to call a timeout, that kind of stuff. Vrabel, actually, perfect example. I think it was in the AFC Championship game, but it was definitely in the playoffs when Drake May's sliding and the clock's running down. And by the way, I noticed it from Drake's perspective and Vrabel's perspective, that Vrabel is there and he's watching the clock and he sees that he's down and he's timeout right at exactly the right moment. Like he's just so locked into the clock and what his job is in that sense. And I think that's where he really excels as a head coach.
Because on the other sideline, we saw a former Super Bowl winning coach in Sean Payton burn a stupid timeout. It goes to show you that even at that level, even a coach that good,
Sean McVay,
still get those. They can both still get those things wrong.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of those things too, that it's much harder when the red light is on, so to speak, right? Like what you kind of are like, people talk about this with TV and stuff where they're like, you're just talking about football. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to put you in front of a camera. I'm going to turn the red light on and say, America's watching. And I'm going to see how coherent you can sound, right? Like the nerves take over, your anxiety. You forget how to do things that you know how to do. I think early head coaches, I think we saw this with Vic Fangio when he was the Broncos coach. Some of the mistakes that he made in terms of game management, I know that if he was sitting on the couch, he 100% would have known how to do it the right way. But it's just all of these different things are happening at once and you make stupid mistakes. And I think that is an underrated aspect of Vrabel's game that he's very, very good at.
Lindsay, thanks so much for talking us through that and for taking us to a different level of understanding of the game that we generally get. It's a privilege to have your insight. We really appreciate you spending time with us on the Irish NFL
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being able to talk to you guys again.
Great stuff. Thank you.